Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to Couch Conversations with the Doctors, where health is wealth. What night is it tonight? It is Monday night, and we welcome you all for being here with us on this evening. Once again, it's Couch Conversations with the Doctors. We're going to ask that you and share again, and share this with each and every one on your timelines and with your friends, and tell everybody to come on in and join us because it's Monday night and it is time for Couch Conversations with the Doctors. As always, we're going to go around, and before people start asking, Dr. 100 Maya is out of town, but she will be back at the end of the month. So, want to make sure that we share that with you. But she did send her until next Monday. So, I do have that via text message that I will share with you guys before we end on this evening. As always, we're going to go around the table and introduce all of our esteemed panels who are here. I want to say hey to Yolanda Williams, who just joined us. Hey, Yolanda, thanks for jumping in and being here with us. To the doctor who says that I threaten him every Monday night, but he tends to always be here on time. That's our very own Dr. James Miller. Hey, Dr. Miller, how are you?
Hey, good evening, everybody. So glad to be here. And, I'm a retired internist, retired in 2019 from practicing Chicago and the Western suburban area. However, I've retired from clinical medicine, but I'm still interested in healing our community. So I'm here tonight to see if I can provide any information that may be helpful to healing.
Outstanding, outstanding. To the man who's an art connoisseur, but he's always on target. That's our very own Joe Harrington. Joe Harrington.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Congressman Davis, for providing this platform. It's a pleasure to be here again with my esteemed colleagues. My career has been mostly in healthcare and public health. I worked at three different hospitals: University of Illinois, Mount Sinai, and Rush, um, and actually worked at both the state and the city health departments. I was assistant commissioner for the city health department under Dr. Terry Mason, and left in 2017 to be the regional health officer for Cook County for the Illinois Department of Public Health. Um, I'm happy to be here, happy to share whatever knowledge and information I can provide.
Outstanding, outstanding. I want to say hey to Valdemir Talley, who is here with us just as well. And he says hi to everybody. To Jack from Gift of Hope, who is here. He says he's having some technical difficulties, but he's coming in and out. But as soon as he can get stable, he will definitely be here. Jack, thanks for sending that message over to us. To the man who everyone's been asking about, who's just had some vacation time, but he is here and he is ice cold as always. That's our very own Dr. Bonnie P. Thomas. Hey, Dr. P.
Hey, Nikki. Again, to the congressman, thank you for creating this platform for us to communicate with the community. I missed everyone, and I'm happy to be back. I'm an internist by training. I love my community. I have focused on men's health, HIV medicine, health inequities, and so I'm just looking forward to having a great discussion tonight.
Where did you go?
Well, one, I went to DC to see my daughter who's at Howard, and then just did some R&R, Congressman.
All right.
Yeah, Pete, how many daughters do you have?
I got 5. No, 3 in college.
I know she was in Howard. A friend of mine has a daughter at Howard, and she had a big birthday party not long ago, and he made the mistake of inviting me. Well, I wasn't going to be in DC on the weekend, so I invited all these young people that I know to his daughter's birthday party, and I understand they just had a ball. Yeah, as a matter of fact, he's a delightful gentleman. Young fellow who owns a funeral home, and his daughter's at Howard, and a lot of kids from Chicago at Howard. I mean, a lot of them. They kind of hold court sometimes in my office because I've had 2 interns in the last few weeks from Howard. Rory Hopkins' daughter and Sean Ford's daughter. And so we've been having us a good, jolly Chicago time.
Nice.
Well, I talked to you this. That's the link I.
Can you guys hear me?
We hear you now.
Okay. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Will Pete, $5. That's five hair salons, 5 nail salons. You know,
Yes.
it's a lot going on.
A lot going on over in my house.
Want to say hey to Nellie Pernell King, who's here with us. She says good evening to everyone. Also want to say hey to Motivation 360, and they said hello to everyone just as well. To my really good girlfriend who is here with us, and she's an awesome, awesome pediatrician and physician, and that's our very own Dr. Sylvia Robinson. Dr. Robinson, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
All right, good evening, everyone. I am happy to be here. I'm an internist and pediatrician by training with subspecialty in pediatric endocrinology, passion for health equity, mentoring and teaching our future generations, and making sure we live long and healthy lives. I'd like to thank the congressman and everyone for having me tonight.
Outstanding, outstanding. Linda Johnson is here and she says, good evening to everyone. And to Dorothy Murphy, who is here with us as well. She says, good evening. Oh, Connie Taylor just popped in. She said, hey, everybody. Good evening to everyone just as well. Carrie Steele is here and she says, hey to everyone. And she thanks everybody for being here. Dorian Stewart is also here and he says, good evening to everyone. He's given us a peek through YouTube and he's sharing some things. Annetta Wilson is here and Annetta says she's watching and ready to learn. All right, Rebecca Rains and Carl Brinson, the president and one of the vice presidents of the NAACP, is here with us just as well. Well, Congressman, to the man who teaches us each and every day that health is wealth, the vanguard on healthcare, our very own Congressman of the Illinois 7th Congressional District.
You know, I had such an exciting time last week with members of the Illinois Primary Healthcare Association until we spent more than an hour with them in my office in DC. And they had a big contingency who had come. And we were having so much fun till we just didn't want to let them go. Of course, votes got called. And so I had to leave them anyway, but there were individuals there from Erie Family Health, Miles Square, from Access, from lots of different places, and we just had ourselves a good time. But given the fact that we are only 15 days or so from a mayoral election, I thought it might make good sense. And of course, individuals can ask any questions or raise any issues that they would desire to. But I thought it might have made sense if we talked a little bit about health policy from the city of Chicago's vantage point. And maybe what is it that we'd like to see whoever gets elected mayor and whoever the members of the city council are who get elected? What would we like for them to focus on as it relates to healthcare? And so if we had an opportunity to give some instructions to the new mayor, whoever that's going to be, or the new members of the city council, what would we instruct them to do? How could they use the platform of their positions on the city council or as mayor of the third largest city in the United States of America, with one of the largest Black populations that you will find in this country? What would be your instructions to these individuals when they take their offices after being elected on April the 4th? And of course, the audience, any question that you might ask, I think would be relevant, even as it relates to the direct health services that you might want to receive. So, Nikki, we'll stop at that and say thanks to everybody who have joined us, and we look forward to an interesting discussion.
Well, I'll jump in. I haven't had a chance to really think through this, but I'll take a chance and throw out some things. One, Congressman Davis, you talked about the Illinois Primary Healthcare Association, which is an umbrella group for federally qualified health centers. And I don't know if many people that have tuned in know about either the association or the federally qualified health centers. And I know that early on in your career, there may not have been the number of federally qualified health centers if you hadn't intervened and done some things on a policy level and actually write some grants. And I know you were instrumental in making Miles Square Health Center federally qualified health center in the city of Chicago. But in terms of your specific question, I just saw an article and I shared it with the group earlier. It was March 11th, 2020, I believe, that COVID was declared a national a pandemic by the World Health Organization. So we're 3 years into the pandemic. And many people have heard and many people talked about the fact that COVID actually reveals some of the gaps in healthcare that we've seen historically, but it made it brutally honest that there were some groups that were disproportionately impacted by COVID as compared to others. And so coming into office, I would like to see what either elected official plans or has any policies or ideas or concepts as to how to address those continuing gaps in life expectancy and those gaps in the uh, adverse impact of some health conditions, particularly on Black and Brown people.
All right.
So I'll jump in and then say that the big thing that I would want the mayor and the elected aldermanic individuals to consider the first the statistics that we see in terms of how healthy or lack of health that exists in various communities, and then address that in a way that we often talk about the problem, but let's look at some possible solution for these problems. We talk about the health disparity, we talk about access to health care, the inequity there, but to look at the communities and let's begin to look at what can be done to change the process so that sick people do worse than healthy people when pandemics or any kind of infection or any kind of condition manifest itself in a community. So we need to look at it as how can we make certain community who may be unhealthy either because their ability to take care of themselves, their ability to provide the proper nutritious food, the ability to get the necessary screenings and necessary vaccination for their children done. So we need to look at that and to address how can we, whether it be from the economics or whether it be from educating, what do we do to address those kinds of issues that can change this paradigm?
I would have to add here that the first thing I would want to know is, do we know or have any kind of agreement on what health is? That's been a topic to the points that my two prior colleagues have made. And the question is that we tend to think of health as the absence of disease. And that's not the definition that we really need to work from a public perspective. So it would seem to me first that I would want to get some consensus among what we're talking about with the people, because, making sure you have regular garbage pickup is health. Making sure that you have, the water is clean, and making sure that the neighborhoods are safe, and making sure that all of these things. So it would seem to me that the one thing I would look for in that person is that ability to understand that and their ability to pull across many different sectors to begin to have a common conversation with those people in charge of different areas for making sure the garbage is picked up and making sure the schools are open and just the person needs to understand that we're not talking about health from a medical point of view only. In fact, from a public perspective, the medical point of view is only a small part of what is considered health as we look at things like employment and uh, family structure and the things that really help to create bad situations that we see running rampant right now in our various communities. And I'll stop there for a moment.
Well, I was just thinking about how things change. I recall when I went to the city council, which was in 1979, and I would start talking about health and what we ought to do. Some of my colleagues would say that health was a national issue and that it was not so much a local issue, and that the federal people ought to be dealing with health. And I never will forget, that's when I met a fellow named Herb Slutsky. And Dr. Slutsky and I became just great friends and ended up working together until unfortunately Herb died. But we had a lot of, and what was so interesting, because Herb had worked for the person who had been the chairman of the health committee, who was a policeman, who had been a policeman. But not only did he not want to deal with health in terms of his committee assignment, but he also worked her for about a year and didn't pay him and spent all the money doing something else. And I will always love Tim Evans, because when Tim became chairman of the finance committee, I talked Tim into agreeing to pay her some of the money that the city owed him for having worked a whole year before and never got paid. So health has come a long way in the minds of the city council and in the minds of the mayor and whoever is going to be there than where it was in 1979 when I went there as a freshman alderman from the 29th Ward.
Yeah, I would just add to my colleagues' comments. One is, with community violence being what it is, the leading cause of death of young Black men between the ages of 15 and 44 is homicide. I would love to see some of the funds that were spent on COVID to shift toward violence prevention and even mental health and behavioral health for young Black men. I think some of what we see in the streets, the violence is from fear. It's from fear, it's from anxiety. And as my colleagues will tell you, all patients don't exhibit the same symptoms. So if you ask a young Black man, are you anxious? Are you fearful? That's their normal existence. But a lot of the violence that happens, I believe, if we had some therapy, if we had some resources for these young Black men, we could help some of that, curtail some of that. The other thing is the opioid crisis. It's something we don't talk about, but I also treat MAT patients. We call it medication assisted therapy. And some of those resources from COVID should go toward helping patients who are addicted to opioid drugs, which right now, 90% of the heroin that's on the streets of Chicago is really fentanyl. So patients who think they're snorting and smoking heroin is snorting and smoking fentanyl. Um, And so patients that you would never suspect. And the other unfortunate thing is it's not very resourceful. A lot of MAT clinics are not resourceful and in the communities that they should be in. So those are two big things that I think that I would love for the mayor to address.
Well, let me ask, what can we do about either one of those? I saw that the president of Mexico the other day said that the United States was really lying about Mexico. And he said they didn't produce fentanyl, and that the United States was trying to shift its inability to handle our drug problem onto Mexico, and that Mexico was not our problem and was not sending fentanyl into the United States, and that the United States was trying to use Mexico as a scapegoat. That's what the president of Mexico pretty much said the other day. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he got a little irritated, about our talking about drugs coming in from Mexico, and that the Mexican government is not doing enough to help stop the flow. And so I guess all of these things become high level when we get right down to it in terms of policy. So, what in the world can we do? And what does the violence we are experiencing have to do with health and medicine?
Well, my colleagues can comment, and Dr. Robinson, I would love to hear you comment since you're a pediatrician and you see a far amount more than I do in terms of adolescents. But I think truthfully that I would have mental health as a regular part of school. It would be a class you had to go to because a lot of our families experience so much trauma, and we think that the trauma is normal because we've seen it generation after generation after generation. And so now these kids who are the other staggering thing too is that when you look at the kids that experience violence, most of those kids have about 80% have either some exposure to substances prior to the violent event. So let's say, I don't know, I don't care if it's weed, alcohol, heroin, cocaine, meth, whatever you want to call it. They've had some exposure to it. So either that is the drugs are used as a sort of coping mechanism, so that's not the. Yes, is drugs the problem? Yes. Should we do more to keep less drugs on our street? Absolutely. But we also need to solve the problem of why our people are using the drugs, right? What is it that you're coping from? And part of it is like very systemic, right? The oppression and racism that exists, all of the lack of resources, jobs, and schools in our community. But that's my thought. Dr. Robinson, what do you think about this?
So I agree that I think one of the biggest issues that we have in dealing with all of these things is significant understaffing. Even if we have mental health clinics and places to go, there aren't people to staff that. There aren't enough people that can go into these different positions. For one, it may be that they can't afford to go through the schooling. They can't afford to take time off from work to get the training. There aren't too many paid internships that might flow into these things. And so I think part of the focus needs to be on putting forth the funds for those resources. In terms of what I do in my clinic with families with obesity, there's an issue with us not having nutritionists. One, because they don't have, it's a 4-year program to become that. And then once you get out, assuming you had to get loans to have that happen, the pay once you get out does not cover nearly what you went through to get there. And so just making it more equitable in terms of getting that training so that we won't be as undersourced as we are. Another of the issues that I see in my patients that have diabetes, the lack of nurses in schools. I have patients that are diagnosed with diabetes, and their parents have to come in and give them their injections because there's no nurse to do it, or there's no one that's comfortable with it or trained to do it. So then the parent either has to not work or keep their child home. And so it's just a lot of not having enough resources, not having the force that we need to carry out the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I want to pick up on some of the things that Pete said. And early on in my career, actually, even before I started my career, I was really interested in psychology, and I thought I would major in psychology. And there's this term called paranoia. Paranoia is unreasonable or unjustified fear that someone or something is out to get you. And in some communities in this city of Chicago, if you don't have some level of paranoia, you there's a whole different thing going on, and your fear is not unreasonable, is not unjustified, is very real. And when that becomes the norm in a community, you can expect people, whether it's direct or indirect or transgenerational, that people are suffering from trauma and don't know it, only because they've lived in these environments for years, and that has become the norm. I know growing up in Woodlawn that I learned at 11 years old that I had to be conscious of everything around me, and my worst threat was what behind, and I do to this day. I don't walk into a room until I look at the room and I survey the room, and I feel that the room is safe enough for me to go in. Most people would say that that's unreasonable because you're safe here and we'll take care of you. But my early experience tells me that that's not the case. And I'm going to open the door to Dr. Mason. He may or not want to jump in on this. That, as I recall, because I was actually at the health department this time, there was a mayor that shut down all the mental health clinics. And so we could have a mayor that came in and really had a platform focus around mental and behavioral health, because we're talking about both mental health problems and behavioral health problems.
You know, I think, as I listen to my colleagues, the other thing we have to remember is that we're still talking about stuff at the victim level. And we're not talking about the cause. And we're not talking about the value proposition for the dysfunction that exists in our community. There are people making lots of money for this dysfunction that we have in our community. And this community didn't get this way overnight. There have been many, we could put all the kind of programs we want, but there's no real, just like there's no real value proposition around people being healthy. People don't make money if we have a healthy society. People make money because people are sick, and they use the sickness to access where they can two things: the payer to pay for it. And I'm not saying people shouldn't do that, but at the same time, we don't really have a value proposition as a society for health in all of the domains that my colleagues have spoken about. So there's a hypocrisy that I see that is purposeful, that people, we could talk about all the heroin and cocaine we want to, but there's just follow the money. And if you follow the money, you'll find out why the problem is there, because people are making money, just like they did with alcohol, just like they do with cigarettes, just like they do with maintaining the level of social dysfunction. And the last thing I want to do, if you add all of that, particularly in communities of color, with the unresolved self-hatred that we are dealing with, that is still a product of our historical sojourn in this country, and that's a whole nother situation. But there are no snap your finger solutions to this. It didn't get started all at once, and until we want to deal with the real forces that control the supply and control access and control the real communities, including law, sometimes may have law enforcement and other things in their pockets. So we need to, if we're going to do it, the first thing we got to do is be truthful about what the problem is and who the problems are.
Yeah, when we look at trauma and stress and those kinds of things that drive people to look for solutions, and when people are in a situation that oftentimes is somewhat hopeless or a ready, healthy solution is not there, they reach for whatever it is that can bring them the quickest relief from their pain and their suffering. And so, so we got to address what's causing the pain and suffering of the people of the community in order to be able to come to a working way and a healthy way to get rid of the problems of drugs. Drugs could be there if the pain and suffering and some of those things were not there, we would not have the epidemic that we have. But the epidemic is there because the people are looking for some relief from some problems that are not being addressed in the appropriate manner.
Well, is there hope? And I guess the reason I asked that question, on my way to church yesterday, I stopped at a press conference. And of course, obviously, we talked about politics and voting and all of that kind of stuff, which is relevant. And so the reporter asked me about Black turnout. And, I gave all the answers, made all the excuses I could make, and things. Well, they changed the polling places and people didn't know where to go. Some people had to walk 3 or 4 blocks to get to where you're supposed to go. I did all the wraparound excuses I guess I could give in terms of trying to justify, I guess, or rationalize. And then when I got to church, of course, people asked me if I could make some comments. And it just happened that the preacher he was winding up an outstanding sermon. And, I said, Reverend, and I didn't know his name because he was from out of town. He was a special guest. I said, I don't know your name, but I can tell you, you lifted me. That song said, love lifted me. I said, because I was down when I came in here, as I was feeling bad, because I didn't know how to answer this reporter's question without. I said, but you gave me some hope that in spite of all of that we can still overcome. I mean, I kind of used the vernacular that we use in terms of saying, she also asked me when was I going to give it up and all. And I said, I don't feel no ways tired. I come too far from where I started from. And I don't believe that he brought us this far to leave us now. say, I say, I've seen the lightning flash. I heard the thunder roll. I felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus saying, fight on. Keep on believing. And I said, Reverend, you gave me that. You. So I want to thank you for that. Given the challenges and the difficulties of all the things that we experience, what hope is there? I mean, what hope is that we can, Dr. Robinson, you mentioned health equity, and is there hope that we can overcome these situations that we are confronted with and continue to make progress?
So I believe that there's always hope, and I feel like the earlier we start with those in our community and the earlier we start in families, the better chance we have of making some significant, consistent change. Um, if you are able to shape and mentor the minds of those coming up, then I think you have a better chance of getting things to change and getting trends to change versus, trying to change maybe some older crotchety minds like self who already set in their ways and, have had their experiences and gone down a different path. So my goal is to always try and instill hope, confidence, and you know, any positivity that I can in my younger patients' lives and their parents' lives so that then that moves forward. When you don't have hope or you feel like why should I care about an election when I don't have a job or I'm having to do this and I'm risking my life every day. You may not That's not at the front of your mind to go to the polls or anything like that. And so we got to in the families first take care of the basic needs before we reach for those higher level things because they're not concerned or thinking about that as I wouldn't be either. You're trying to survive and maintain, and so that's kind of at the forefront.
Joe, you said that you wanted to be a psychologist at one point, or you thought you wanted to be. You know, I look at the turnout was about 32%. That means 68% of the people did not turn out. 68%. That's a lot of people in a country that is supposed to be one of the most sophisticated nations in the world. I mean, we're supposed to be pretty much the wealthiest nation in the world, the most desirable nation in the world. Uh, People are beating at our doors or our gates or our whatevers every day, trying to get in. Um, how do we change some of that? What do we do?
Yeah, I think Congressman, you hit it on the nail about providing hope. I think people have to see um, that life could be better. Things could be better. And my direct action, my action of going to the polls, um, will have an impact on life being better for me. Um, and it does mean our candidates being very explicit around what their plans are to make life better for that family, for that person, to have someone to decide, okay, well, before I go to work, oh, I'm willing to be, 15, 20 minutes late for my job, which I'm not, I'm not making light of that because a lot of our patients and community members, I mean, they really do, they need that money. So, but to know that either one, I'm a prearranged for my, email my boss to say, hey, I'm gonna be 20 minutes late because I gotta go vote because I won't have time before, after work. But just making that sacrifice, and I think those candidates have to be very explicit around what their plans are to make life better for patients. And then to Dr. Robinson's point, I mean, like really, like safe communities, like to have a lot of single moms who are coming home from work and feeling like real fear, like Joe said, real fear. It ain't fake, it's real. That something bad could happen to me from the bus stop to my house, and it's a half a block, but it's real. But to communicate to those single moms and even to the men, I tell people all the time. People are like, "Oh, you're a man." It doesn't matter. I mean, man don't stop bullets. And if anything, they might be even quicker to shoot me because they figure, they can't whoop me or, and so I think, we got to be, our candidates have to speak very clear, concise messages to the community to say, this is how your life is going to be different with me in that office as opposed to my opponent.
Yeah, I want to jump in and offer up a different approach to why it's important to vote. And I'll speak from a personal standpoint in terms of why I vote and why I think it's important for me to vote. Uh, you've all heard that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different results. And many people in our community have been voting, and no matter who they vote for, the results seem to be the same in terms of their standard of living. So there seems to be an inconsistency with actually voting and seeing the change that you want to, regardless of who's running for office. And that's very frustrating. But for me personally, I remember, and I know, because I remember history and I know our history. And I know that people died and fought for the right for us to vote. I have a personal, a moral, and an ethical obligation to vote for those people that fought and died for me to have just the opportunity to vote. And so I've been voting since I was age eligible to vote, not out of a sense that one candidate was better than another, but because I had this personal obligation to vote, regardless of who the candidates were, because my ancestors, my parents, my grandparents fought so that we could be in a position to do this. So for me, I have a personal duty and obligation to vote.
Joe, and I've been listening to what we've been said, and voting is important. And, obviously we want to vote, but we're going to vote for a person, not God. No matter, I don't care who it is, neither one of these people by themselves single-handedly is going to be able to make that much change. That's not in the hands of just the person who wins the mayoral election. I've lived in Chicago all the life I've known about, and I've lived in Inglewood, grew up in the Inglewood community. And there was a time in the Inglewood community we didn't have to be worried about what we have to worry about now. There was a time people didn't have to, and it's changed, and Dr. Bell has shown a lot of that. But we got to stop thinking that any one body is going to change anything. And what happened is that what was different then that I see now is that we had strong families in those days. And we had strong extended families that went beyond the house I lived in into the houses of the people that were my neighbors. And we had values that weren't all about me, and I, but it was about we and us. And we used those values to build our own businesses. I grew up in a neighborhood in Inglewood where all the businesses were initially owned by whites, but all became owned by blacks. And we had wonderful neighborhoods, block clubs, and all kinds of things. And the question is, when we started shipping our jobs, our good paying jobs that were in the steel mills and what have you, to Japan, because that was cheaper to make steel there than here. When we started looking at how we could begin to think about re-engineering our communities, and a lot of these jobs that used to be available weren't there anymore, and we then had an influx of cocaine and other drugs into our community. It's the same thing all over again, just a different drug. But the profit margin and the people who are controlling of those kinds of things, and now we have drugs that are far more addictive than they used to be. To Dr. Pete's position, I'm not really. I don't care who gets elected, that neither one of those men by themselves are going to be able to make they may be good, but they ain't God. And our situation is beyond that. We used to have Black businesses. We used to have 23 Black automobile dealerships. We used to have 7 Black banks. In the United States, we used to have 400 Black hospitals. And now what do we have? We've not made any progress. We've gone backwards. And there's a lot of reasons that more than we have time for on this one program or many programs to even talk about. But I don't, the change, the really change in these communities have to come from the people that live in them, and the people that live in them have to feel empowered that they can make any kind of change and have the tools and resources to do that. And the import of drugs in our community was not an accident, and they knew exactly what the drugs are going to do, not only just physically and mentally to us, but the kind of crime that it would create. And so I'm going to stop right there because I get very emotional about this, because I'm tired of hearing that I'm tired of hearing us put our faith in a person or 2 persons that may be elected, and then put the burden of all of our work on them. That's not fair. They have a role, but that's not all of it.
Well, I think the other thing here also is, again, as individuals look and determine whether or not they are going to go out to the poll. I think they have several things that they consider. One, is this person speaking to my needs and my issues? Is this person going to make a difference in if this person get elected? Which person get elected? Will they make a difference in my family ability to afford those things that I want for my family? And I think that as we've seen with time, and many of the issues that are there that are causing that have changed our community, as Dr. Mason said, are related to how we've changed our relationship with one another. And that has nothing to do with the person who is the alderman or the person who is the mayor. Now, however, some of these things do get affected by the makeup or the resources that are put into our community, and that does make a difference. But each individual, can they always look at that and determine, this person can help with that, or that person can't? And I don't think that answer is clear to any. As he's saying, we look at that, and when people give their platform, oftentimes it doesn't address what they consider is important to them, and they just stay home, or they decide not to make the sacrifice that they would have to make.
Yeah, picking up on something that Dr. Mason said, and Congressman Davis has experience with this, and I think it's important for people to understand. That we have 50 aldermen who can vote. The mayor can't vote. You need 26 votes to get anything done in city council. And you might be up there and you may be talking about what you want to do, and you may have a policy or plan that you want to put in place, but ultimately it's mathematics. You need 26 votes to get anything done in city council. Sometimes people forget about that. I've joked with people and said, even if the mayor was your next door neighbor and you had a problem with your garbage and you called the mayor who was your friend, the mayor would have to make a call to the person that's over the people to pick up your garbage, to say somebody's got a problem with their garbage. And that's got to go down to the person who is responsible for picking up your garbage. And if that person on that day and time does not want to pick up your garbage will not be picked up.
Well, what are we missing in terms of our educational system? Are we teaching enough? Are we not understanding? Are we different from other people? Are we missing something that other people get? I mean, I know we need reparations, and I think reparations can come in many different ways. But I inject this notion of hope because I think it takes a lot of hope to go to medical school. I think it takes a certain kind of belief to get through prep school or to position oneself so that they can pass the entrance exams, so they can hustle the resources that it really. I don't know many people who had a rose garden on their way to wherever they are. I often laugh about the two or three wealthy people that I've known in my lifetime. And they didn't start out being wealthy. As a matter of fact, they were totally broke. I'm talking about totally broke. Uh, I mean, two people that I kind of got to know well, like John H. Johnson, and I became good friends. And I thought about the fact that at one point he was about the wealthiest black person in America. And of course, he grew up in a little town, Arkansas City, Arkansas, which wasn't far from where I grew up. And his mother had to bring him to Chicago so he could go to high school because they didn't have a high school for black people in his town. And, you know, this guy gets to be John H. Johnson, Ebony Jet, whatever, and whatever, and whatever. So, how do we inject into our communities, into ourselves, and into our people the idea that the road is still there, and not just in terms of personal wealth. That's never meant a great deal to me in terms of my scheme of things, but personal being and the idea that some of this equity, a lack of equity that we discuss all the time everywhere I go, every venue that I'm in, and we talk about it. And is it reachable, or do we have to do like the man from La Mancha, you know, dream the impossible dream, or fight the unbeatable foe? I mean, we have to hold on to something. You know, this is Women's History Month. What did Effie Ellis hold on to? What did Agnes Latimer hold on to? Outstanding Black female physicians who helped change the scope of healthcare in Black life in Chicago and in places throughout America. And so we got to have some of that same kind of Dorothy Height hope, that same stuff that people had.
I was going to say, I believe that exposure in these instances is extremely important. Um, I spent most of my younger years growing up on the west side of Chicago. I can't think of any point in my neighborhood where I went to a store that was owned by Black people, or, um, you know, any of the other surrounding communities. So, Dr. Mason, like when you talk about being able to you know, think back on a time where things weren't that way. Like I feel like a lot of people don't have that experience. It's never been that way for them. And if it wasn't that way for, their parents, or, if somehow they just don't have access to maybe older generations or members of their family, then they never have that exposure or that experience, or know that that's something that they're capable of, or, that they can aspire to. Same thing in medicine. You don't see it. Sometimes you don't feel like you can achieve it. And so there has to be that exposure to just, put it in your mind. That's something I can do. I might not be there now, but that person's doing it, so I can get there too.
And
Yeah,
Judge Pincham. I'm sorry. It was Judge Pincham said that I remember that when we were in school, his daughter Sandy was in school with us. He said, "You can't be what you can't see." And in our communities, one things that we don't see, and one of the things that I learned while I was driving a bus for the Chicago Transit Authority when I was in medical school, is I learned how ethnically segregated the city of Chicago is. That I could drive from one community to another, and I would see signs all in Chinese, and then I'd see them all in Korean, and I see only Korean people in those neighborhoods, and I see only people that were of those ethnic persuasions in those neighborhoods doing and helping each other. There was a time, and Congressman Davis knows this much better than I do, but when folks came from up north from down south, there was a sort of camaraderie that we had, a sort of working together that we had. I grew up knowing that I may have had one biological mama in my house, but I had about 20 of them in my block, and that had the right to say something to me, a right to discipline me, a right to and then tell my mother or tell my father about what was going on. But we've lost the Cohen community, and now everybody between their cell phones and all their gadgets and everything else, we don't have that community in the way that we used to have it. That we worked together and did things together, and we loved each other. And yes, we had some violence in those days, but people knew who was doing what, and things could be taken care of in those days. That's not what we're seeing today. And I'm going to say this as I close: none of this is by accident. What we see today, all of what we're seeing, is all intentional and has been planned. And I'm going to stop right there.
yeah, I want to jump in and add something. And you talked about hope, and I want to provide some examples. Dr. Robinson, Dr. Miller, Dr. Thomas, and Dr. Mason all overcame significant roadblocks to be who they are and where they are today. And I never set any limits on myself personally. I always believed that I could do, and I still believe I can do anything I want to do, and I can be anything I want to be. We need to instill that kind of spirit in our children. They need to know whose they are, they need to know about the struggle, but they also need to know it may be hard, the road may be hard, but you can be anything you want to be. But you got to put in some sweat equity and you got to work to do that. And so my colleagues have overcome significant barriers, sometimes just like me. I've been in rooms, and actually, I went to St. Rita High School. I started in 1962. I finished in 1966. I was one of 6 Blacks out of 400 in my graduating class. I was in the honors section for all 4 years. You can do these things, but you got to put in some sweat equity, and you also have to believe in yourself in spite of the odds that you can do it. And it helps if you don't have a village, create a village around you and get them to nurture you, and you will make it and you will be successful.
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's where we find our answers, and if we are looking for our answers in terms of all of our answers in terms of those people that we elected, then we're not going to find them. There are many of the answers is within our community, within our relationship with each other, and the kind of way that we care and love and show that love to and for each other is where we're going to find the answer to changing things for the betterment, as opposed to trying to really you can't legislate certain things. That has to come from the heart, and how you care about each other, how you relate to each other, how you are willing, whether or not you're willing to help someone in your neighborhood, and whether you're willing to give some authority, as Dr. Mason say, to other folks to help you raise your children that doesn't come by electing any person. It comes by it comes from our heart, and we got to get back to dealing with some of those kinds of things, and if we want to see the improvement that we're talking about.
Well, the congressman often says that a child can't be what a child can't see. So that exposure that was great. I mean, this has been such a robust conversation, and I know you guys hate when I say this, but we've reached our time. Just want to say a few shout outs to a few people who are here with us. I want to say hey to Bishop Jeff Davis, who's here with us, and he gives this conversation a great thumbs up. To William Martinez and Kamal Murray, who are here with us just as well. They're excited about the conversation. To Shirley Fields, who says, keep going, Dr. Mason. I love that conversation. She's here with us just as well. To Courtney Jones, who is here with us from the Dearborn Realtors Association, to Dorothy Murray, who's here, Connie Taylor, who is here, Barbara Ivory, who is here. Dorothy Murphy asked a question. Dorothy says, well, she kind of makes a statement. She says, I would urge attention to the state for long-term care, both in terms of staffing, quality, and safety and costs. Tamika Thomas is here, and she says, hey to Uncle Terry. And Tamika then did the roll call, making sure that everybody joined in. Audrey J. Cox is here. She says, good evening to everyone. Vanessa Wesley is here. She says, good evening. Valdemir Talley says, fear, anxiety, and trauma. I agree about funding for anti-violence programs. Virginia Knight is here. She says, evening to all and happy, healthy Monday. Barbara Ivory is here, and Barbara has a question. She says, I have a question. If marijuana users are criminalized, then what do we say about opioid users? We lock up some drug users away while we're forgiving of others. Okay. Rosetta Guy is here, and she says, good evening to everyone. Sister Bonnie is here. She says, so true, Dr. Mason, so true. Linda Johnson says, yes, that is right. Dr. Miller, you are on target. Shirley Fields once again is saying hello. Linda Johnson is here, and she's laughing out loud at something somebody did. It probably was Dr. Mason. Yolanda Williams says, also, some people don't come out because it was 7 Blacks on the ballots. So some just didn't know what to do. Well, that's a great point, Yolanda, and thanks for sharing. Addie Davis is here, and she says, good evening to everybody. Barbara Ivory also asked a question. Miss Williams, I think all Black communities just don't understand how the voting system works. They haven't a clue as to why it is so important to show up at those polls. Very important. It's an important thing to show up at the polls. So let's try educating each one. Maybe we should do some sip and savors when you invite your neighbors over to your house, sip some coffee and explain this whole system to them. That's something we should do. Maybe we need to go back to having those kitchen conversations when we made sure that our phone tree knew everything that was going on. Yolanda Williams says, speak to Dr. Miller. Yolanda Williams also puts up that 100 sign. Linda Johnson says, teach it, Congressman Davis, teach it. And there's so much going on. There's a whole list. If you guys can see the comments, there's a whole list on the side of what some people were saying to you. And I would read all of them, but I can't because we've reached our time. Nellie is giving a great hands up to Dr. Harrington. Kathy Jones says, absolutely, Dr. Mason. Hey, how you doing? She also says to Joe Harrington, I agree with you also. We must put it in work. It's never too late to have hope and to believe. Sister Bonnie says the community or blocks had a hand in raising us all. And she is definitely right. We called them community spankings. Miss Rose would see you do something at the corner and you got whooped all the way down the street. So it happens, but it was different then, and we were different. It was a different time. We're going to go around as we always do, and we're going to ask everybody there until next Mondays. I know that our colleague Doug joined us late, but Doug, what's your until next Monday?
Well, I just like to reemphasize the spirit that Dr. Mason was talking about. I think we do have to look out for our neighbors and be our neighbors' keepers. I think that's what being a good neighbor means.
Outstanding, outstanding. And I don't know if you guys can hear, but there are still messages still rolling in. There's more of them rolling in. Sylvia Robinson, Dr. Robinson, what's your until next Monday?
Okay, I think I will focus my next Monday on something that I heard in church this past weekend. So we know there are a lot of things that happen, a lot of things that affect how we handle situations, and there are difficulties in life, but you don't have to join in with I'll call them low things and low opinions that are going on. Be kind to yourself. If your thoughts are low, bring them up, because beating down on yourself like everybody else or others isn't going to serve anybody in the grand scheme of things. You just have to take what's going in stride and come up with a plan to get to where you need to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Joe Harrington, you're until next Monday.
Well, I've got three, Nikki, but they're all brief. One is a quote from Cervantes, and he said, "Believe there are no limits but the sky," and that's a belief I share. The other is a biblical quote, James 2:14, which is one of my favorite. Faith without works is
It's
dead.
dead. Come on, Bishop.
So you got to put in the work. If you want to be something, if you want to do something, you can have faith, you can have hope, you can have everything that you want. But if you don't put in the work, it ain't going to happen. And then lastly, there are now two candidates for mayor. One of those candidates looks like me, talks like me. I believe he thinks like me. I'm not going to tell people who to vote for, but I'm going to vote for the person that I think may do some of the things that I would do if I were mayor. And I leave it up to everybody else to decide who they're going to vote for.
All right, all right. Dr. James Miller, you're until next Monday.
Well, I think that I want to leave with this idea that we have to look for answers from within. There's no cavalry coming to free us, and so the issues and the problem that we're facing every day, we're gonna have to come together and solve those problems, and not really wait for some magical magic to fall out the sky, because it's not going to happen. We have to work on those things. We have to love one another. We have to care for one another, and we have to be concerned for each other. That's the solution to changing the things that we want to be changed.
All right. We have to focus to make change. In the words of Aretha Franklin, it ain't no way. Ain't that right, Dr. Mason?
That's right. That's really right. That's way right.
You're until next Monday, Dr. Mason.
I know some of the things I said may have sounded very bad, or may have sounded that I don't have any hope, but I do have hope. And I hope that we can get back to the point where we really used to love each other, where we used to care for each other, where my son was your son, and my daughter was your daughter, and I treated them that way. And until we reestablish ourselves as a village, not unlike everybody else still does that. If you go through Chinatown, you go through some of these other ethnic towns, places, you see this, and we've lost it. And I guess Roberta Flack said it best. She said, "Where is the love? Where is it?" And we got to get that back if we're gonna make a difference. And we got to know that all you can do is make the difference you can make, and then get with people that agree with what you're trying to do, and then you can get something done. But as long as we act like we are islands unto ourselves, we're going to be that. And until then, until we begin to see that our biggest strength is what we had when we came up from the South, and that is a willingness to work together, knowing that none of us all had the answers, but together we had the answer.
All right, Dr. Mason. Well, Yolanda Williams says to you, nothing you have said is bad. We needed to hear the truth, Dr. Mason. And she says, you know what? We need the love. Where is it? We need it, and that's family. Want to say thank you so very much. Want to say thank you to each and every one of our viewers and our listeners on every Monday night. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for growing the community. Want to continue to encourage you to make sure that you join Couch Conversations. Dr. Maya Green was not able to be here with us on this evening, but her until next Monday, which she sent via text, was continue to fight on, love your tribe, and remember to create your tribe. So I wanted to make sure we share that. Just a few announcements that of some things that we have going on in our office. Just want to remind you guys of April 15th, that's Saturday, April 15th. That will be our health consortium that we'll be doing, our health symposium. That information is definitely to come. So I want to make sure we remind you of that. And also want to remind you of Congressman Davis's Father's Day event. We will have more information that will be coming out in reference to that just as well. And also want to remind you, it is a little chilly out. And if you are in a place where there is no herd immunity, a lot of you may think COVID is gone. I'm not here to do the scare, but it is not. COVID is not gone. So we got to stay safe. And actually, some of our hospitals right in the medical district has had to kind of stop and shut down visitation of patients because the numbers of COVID actually went up. So just want to remind everybody to be safe, wear your mask if you're in a place where you don't feel like you have herd immunity. And remember, if you want to be trendy and have the latest, get the latest vaccine. Don't let everybody get it and you haven't gotten yours. So make sure you get the latest vaccine. Congressman Davis, take us home.
Well, let me thank you all. I was at the Friendship Baptist Church on Sunday, and the pastor was having an anniversary. And after the services, his wife convened us all down in the basement of the church, and they had a raffle of the favorite things that he liked to eat. And I actually won the raffle. I had a raffle ticket, and I'm saving that number. And the next time I play the lottery, when it's at $20 million, I'm going to play that one. But I want to thank the folks who were there. And also, I was excited because both the pastor's sisters work in healthcare. One in Kansas City, she's the head of the Kansas Primary Care Association. And the other one works at a clinic, is the director of the Friendship out at near the University of Chicago. And so we just had ourselves a wonderful, wonderful time. But let me thank all of you. I wish and I hope, Nikki, that you can save all of those comments, because listening to everybody has renewed my sense of hope and feeling of possibility. And it really reminded me of my father, that I often tell people that Job was his favorite character in the Bible. And he always would quote Job whenever you were having difficulty, or if you think you got a problem, or if you went to him and say, you know, I'm having a tough time, he'd say, yeah, I guess what you told me is pretty rough. Said, but remember Job. And so anytime there's a rough time, I try and remember Job, that Job was experiencing some serious difficulty, but he never gave up. He kept plugging along. And everything that he had lost was restored in manyfold. And some of those things that we may have strayed away from, I think we can get back to them. My mother used to say, we need to go back to that old landmark. And I think that's a lot of what Dr. Mason has suggested, Joe has suggested, others have suggested, Dr. Miller has suggested. Doug, it is so good to see you. Haven't seen you in a little bit, but you are looking good. We never stop thanking you for the 2 years that you spent in our office as our resident in-office physician. Uh, we had a lot of fun. So I just thank everybody for making this a very interesting, as a matter of fact, I'd say profound discussion about where we are, what we're doing, and what we need to do. And like you, Joe Harrington, I believe the sky is the limit. and, and we just got to keep reaching for it and reaching for it. And eventually we'll get there. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much. And we hope to see you next week. All right.
Dr. Mason.
Yes, ma'am.